Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on today's webinar, Building a Business Case for Your Technology Initiative. My name is Katie Burke. I'm the Government Program Strategist at Laserfiche, and it's my pleasure to be joined by Melissa Henley, Director of Marketing Communications.
Good morning, everyone.
Now, before we dive into today's material, there are just a few housekeeping items that we'd like to cover. First, I've taken the liberty of muting all of you. This is to ensure that we don't have any background noise from your office. If you have a question about WebEx or the logistics of the webinar, feel free to type it into the chat box in the upper right-hand portion of your screen. For all questions related to the content of today's webinar, please type them into the Q&A box. The Q&A box allows us to type responses and share questions with other attendees. But don't worry, we've allocated some time at the end of the webinar to have an interactive Q&A discussion. Also, don't worry about diligently taking too many notes throughout today's webinar. We will be sending you a link to the recording after it is ready in the next couple days. So hang tight for that, and you can relive the fun. So Melissa and I are particularly excited about this webinar because it was inspired by some recent conversations we had with some of our clients at City Clerks conferences. We found that so many individuals have great ideas for how technology can be leveraged to improve their organization's operations. They see opportunity to streamline processes, to save money, and to provide better service. However, their ideas lose momentum when trying to secure buy-in from elected officials, city managers, and other decision makers. Building a business case is all about demonstrating the value that your idea has to the organization and presenting it in a way that aligns with the strategic goals of the decision makers. By doing this, you increase your chances of securing funds and resources to get your project off the ground. In our roles at Laserfiche, Melissa and I develop business cases every year with the creation of marketing plans and other projects. We got together and developed this presentation and a set of best practices based on our experiences as well as the experiences of other Laserfiche clients. Our goal is for you to leave today's webinar with a framework for creating a proposal that sets you up for success. And Melissa has the secret sauce.
Well, I think secret sauce is being a little generous, but thank you, Katie. So how many of you, when faced with trying to convince other people to do something you want, just want to stamp your feet and say, I'm right, why won't you just realize I'm right? And how many of you don't see the desired results from that? Probably most of you. And that's because building a business process it's just as much about knowing how to present your ideas and how to be persuasive as it is to finding the right solution. And when you do research on building a business process or building a business case, it can often seem to be a complex process, but it really boils down to 5 key steps. So understanding who's involved in the decision-making process and what their motivations are. Articulating the problem your project solves and why your organization should get behind it. Developing a plan for how you'll implement your technology you're proposing. Showing what costs you'll cut and what benefits your project will generate. And being prepared to handle objections from stakeholders without getting flustered. Now realize we're going to talk a little bit about we're going to mostly talk today about getting decision makers on board. There's a whole other part of building a business case which involves getting your coworkers excited about adopting a new way of working, getting them on board with your idea. And so a lot of these ideas apply, especially when it gets to handling objections and being persuasive. So, you know, think about ways you can apply that if that's something you're looking at doing as well. Now to help you, Katie and I have come up with an exercise that we'll step through during today's webinar. So Katie, let's tell people about the City of Springfield.
Thanks, Melissa. Now, we're going to be following a case study throughout the webinar because I know as much as you like to just listen to Melissa and I, we thought it would be a little bit more engaging to have you all interact with an example. We chose the example of the City of Springfield and its agenda management process because we noticed that the majority of registrants for today's webinar come from the clerk's office of municipalities. So for those of you that are unfamiliar with the clerk's office or agenda management, that's okay, we'll walk through it. So congratulations, everyone. You have a new job. You are now the city clerk at the City of Springfield. You were at a recent conference and you were telling a neighboring city clerk that you're really sick of staying late on agenda packet days, compiling the agenda packet for city council meetings. The agenda items are just so disorganized and you can't seem to get the items together in a quick manner. So your friend was shocked that you're doing all of this manually, and she goes, oh my gosh, we are using this new technology to automate the process. You should really look into it too. I'm no longer staying late, and the city saved a ton of money by reducing printing costs and manual labor. So you did some research, and you found that this agenda management solution would work well for your organization too. You found the technology solution you want, but now you just need to figure out how to get funding for the initiative from the City Council. So before we move on, let's take a look at how the process is currently running so that we can examine the issues and opportunities for improvement so that we can talk about them later on throughout the webinar. So currently, the agenda management process kicks off when a submitting department emails a copy of an item they would like to be featured on the agenda to the agenda reviewing committee. The committee consists of the city attorney, the finance department, and the city manager's office. And within the committee, the reviewers like to review the items a little differently. Some of them like to open the documents in Word and mark it up in Word, track changes, and send it back to the submitter. Others prefer to print out the document, mark it up with a pen, and then stick it back on the submitter's desk. So the submitter is then responsible for incorporating all of the changes from the reviewing committee and resubmitting again until the items are finally approved. Once the items are approved, they're sent to you, the city clerk, and you end up with a stack of papers on your desk from the paper items, as well as a stack of emails in your inbox from the electronically submitted items. You then have to manually compile the agenda packet, and then you scan it into your document management system, and you send it over to a print shop. The print shop then prints 30 packets, and those packets go to the staff, to the city council, and a couple packets in case anyone from the public would like a copy. Now, in looking at the current process, I'm sure you all can see a number of issues to begin with, but I'm going to highlight a couple that we'll focus on for today's purposes. So first of all, agenda packets are a real burden to compile because they're so disorganized with paper and electronic files coming in. And not only are they disorganized, but they're also really expensive. You estimate that you're spending about $1,200 in printing each meeting. Also, approving the agenda packets is tedious, and edits from one reviewer oftentimes conflicts with another reviewer. They don't realize that maybe the finance department has made one change on paper, but the city attorney has made a different change to the same item in an electronic version. Also, these paper agenda packets sometimes are between 300 and 500 pages, and so they take up a ton of space. You're running out of storage in your storage facility, and you're either going to somehow miraculously make more room for filing cabinets or build a whole new record center. Now, by comparison, an automated solution would make all of this process digital. Items are submitted electronically via the technology system. Then they're automatically routed to agenda reviewers. Reviewers work from the same document, so the changes are compiled in one place and they won't conflict with each other because the reviewers can see what another reviewer has noted. If an item needs revision, it's sent via email back to the submitter, and they resubmit electronically. Packets are compiled by the technology using a standard template, and then the clerk is just responsible for reviewing the document. When it's finalized, you hit publish, and it's made available to the council members on their iPads and staff and the public on the city's website. And voila, it's done. No more printing, no more paper pushing, no more late nights. It's the dream. So hopefully we can help the clerk, get the green light for this initiative. But the first step in the process is to identify the stakeholders and their needs. So Melissa, can you tell us a little bit more about how that's done?
Absolutely. Thanks, Katie. Now, when it comes to building a business case, your first step, surprisingly, isn't about the technology at all. It's about people, and most specifically, it's about your stakeholders. Now, stakeholders are the people that say yes or no to your project. And when it comes to stakeholders, you're going to want to identify a few people. The person that will help you get people to say yes, the person or people that will actually say yes or no, and the people that maybe will be trying to get people to actually say no. So the person who will help you get people to say yes is your champion. And many of you, if you're not that person in your organization, knows people like this. These are the people who are excited by opportunity and thrive on change. They see the possibilities in technology and in new ways of working. Now, They may not have the power to sign off on a decision, but their expertise is respected by the people who do. They also understand personalities and processes of your organization on a pretty granular level and can help you navigate the culture within your organization. Now, when it comes to decision makers, these are the people that have the power to say yes to a project and are held accountable for the final outcome. Now, as the saying goes, with great power comes great responsibility. So they feel they have a lot to lose if a project fails. Now, most decision makers, regardless of where they started in their careers, spend the majority of their days dealing with macro issues. So they're really unlikely to have a detailed understanding of whatever you're proposing. That means they rely on the advice of others for recommendations. And the people who give those recommendations are your influencers. Influencers can work in your favor, or they can be blockers. Blockers don't have the power to say yes, but they can get it in your way and make it very easy for your decision makers to say no. Now, this could be because they have an alternative idea they're promoting, or they may be concerned about losing power or influence in the organization. Whatever their motivation, it's critically important to pay attention to them and either win them over or be prepared to neutralize their misgivings. So that's really, when it comes to stakeholders, that's the balance you have to master. Supporting your champion, giving them the information they need to be persuasive, neutralizing your blocker, and convincing your decision maker with the facts they need to make it easy to say yes. So now let's take a look at the decision makers in Springfield. Katie?
Great. So I'm going to go ahead and open up our first poll. You all should see a poll question on your screen now. Go ahead and select the answers that you think are most correct for this question. So who would be the decision maker or decision makers at the City of Springfield? Would it be the citizens, the council, the city attorney, or finance? All right, Melissa, what do you think?
I don't know, Katie. These seem like a lot of good options. I think the citizens would benefit from this, but they definitely aren't going to be making the decision, although they definitely will be holding the decision makers accountable for the final outcome.
True.
The city attorney and the folks in finance will also be benefiting from this solution because it will certainly make their jobs easier when it comes to approving agenda items. So I'm going to say likely because our city clerk is going to have to propose this idea before the city council, they will be the decision makers.
Melissa, you're a genius. What can I say?
Often been said, Katie.
So yeah, that's absolutely correct. The citizens, the city attorney, and finance would all benefit from an automated solution because the city will be saving time and money and hassle throughout this process. But the city council is the one that's ultimately going to approve the funding in this case. So the city council is going to be our final decision makers. Now, after we've identified our stakeholders, we need to clearly define the business need that we're trying to solve so that the decision makers really understand the problem and why exactly it's important.
You mean you can't just tell them it's important and they'll immediately agree?
Well, when I do that, everybody listens, always. But, you know,
yeah.
For other people, it doesn't work that way. Just kidding. So we can think of our business need as a pain point. Whatever pain your organization has, that's the source of the need, and your task is to figure out how to alleviate the suffering. You may identify the pain point yourself. Maybe your agenda management process takes too long. But maybe your boss calls you into her office and says, you need to fix this. But whether it's a problem that you identify or one that's handed to you, you have to research the business needs so that you can finally build your case. It's important to realize that some projects are also driven by opportunities and not necessarily problems. So for example, you might save 40% in operating costs if you implement some new technology, or maybe you'll benefit from a sales promotion if you decide to purchase a technology quickly. But regardless of whether your project is driven by a problem or an opportunity, there are 4 specific steps you'll want to take to identify the business need. The first is to ask. Talk to your beneficiaries. Your job is to ask them what they think is going on and then listen to their answers. Gather the relevant data and probe further. They might not know the underlying reason for the problem, but you can help them discover the cause and then identify a reasonable solution. Put on your detective hat and try to piece together the information that might not be apparent to others with a narrower view of the process. The second step is to then analyze those processes. Don't just take people's word for it. Dig in. Diagram the process to figure out where things are falling apart and where the bottlenecks are. Examine all the pain points you come across so then you can fully expose the needs. Then once you've analyzed, go back to your stakeholders and make sure that your assumptions match theirs. Discuss what the system should do and what the constraints are. So maybe there's compatibility that needs to happen with other IT systems, or you'll need resources for the rollout. So make sure that all of the assumptions match. And then finally, document, document, document. Record everything you learn, where the pain comes from, who's experiencing it, and what the solution needs to accomplish. This will save you a lot of time later as you prepare your presentation to stakeholders. They'll want to see what you're basing your recommendations on. So it's time to go back to the City of Springfield for our next poll question. So what is or are the primary problems the City of Springfield is trying to solve? Is it the time and time-related expenses of an inefficient agenda management process? Is it the cost of printing paper-heavy agenda packets? What about the expense of building a new records facility since they're running out of space in their current records room? Or what about miscommunications between departments at the city? We'll give you all just a minute to respond. Okay, Melissa, I'll put you on the spot again.
Okay.
What do you think?
What do I think? Well, I think it could actually be a few of these things. Obviously, they want to solve the time and time-related expenses of an inefficient agenda management process. Should the clerk and his or her staff have many other things to do with their time besides collating agenda packets.
Right.
Also, the cost of printing those agenda packets, you know, several hundred pages worth of paper, not to mention the wear and tear on printers, is costly. And I imagine if you have conflicting reviews and having to reprint packets, that could be pretty expensive. Of course, the expense of building a new records facility. We have one of our clients that saved a projected $5.5 million by not having to build a new records facility. So
big chunk of change.
Big chunk of change right there. And while I think departmental miscommunication is a benefit, that's not actually a problem that will be solved by this initiative. So my answers would be A, B, and C.
Melissa, you're 2 for 2, and looking at the responses that have come in, it looks like our attendees on today's webinar are right with you too. So the new automated agenda management solution will definitely assist with the process-related issues and costs that the City of Springfield is facing. It will also help the city to avoid building a new record center by decreasing the paper output of the agenda management process. However, while miscommunication around agenda management specifically may decrease due to a better procedure, this new technology won't necessarily be a miracle worker for making sure that everyone communicates effectively across the entire organization. If somebody had a technology to do that, then, you know, that would just be a miracle. So answers A, B, and C are correct, but D is just a little bit of a stretch. So I'm going to close that poll, and we're going to go ahead and move forward to the third step in the process. After understanding the problem that you're solving, decision makers will want to know how exactly you plan on solving it. So it's important to come prepared with an idea of how you're going to implement the solution so that you can show that the proposed solution is not only feasible, but that you're capable of seeing it through. You'll need to sketch in broad strokes how your organization would implement the solution you're proposing, because this helps you see whose support you'll need. If you start to think through the how and then suddenly realize that HR and accounting will have to contribute resources, you'll need to get information from them and get their buy-in before you present the case. This process also reveals transition costs, which are easy to overlook. It's so easy to get so excited that you forget how, to consider how you'll migrate data or perhaps sunset an old system or train people how to use the new system. Now remember, at this step, you're not sorting out every little task, just the main types of tasks and which departments and people will be involved. If you can answer the 4 W's and an H, you'll be on the right track. So be sure you know what has to be done first and the order of tasks that you'll complete. And then know for each step in the process who will do it, and make sure that they know that this is their piece to own. Then figure out where the major costs will be incurred. Will it be a major upfront expense, or will you incur expenses as you go along and expand the system? And then how will the rollout take place? Will you start with one small department first and then expand to others later, or will you do everybody at once? What will that rollout look like? And then finally, what training will be required? This is really important because you want to make sure that after you invest in the system, people are prepared to use it, so don't forget about training. So it's time to visit the City of Springfield again. So if you were making a plan just in broad strokes for the City of Springfield's agenda management solution, which department should be involved in this plan, and what would their responsibility be? Would it be finance? Would they be responsible for projecting costs and potential financial returns for the system? Would IT be responsible for identifying implementation timelines and potential integration needs with other IT systems? Or what about HR? Would they be responsible for training every single new hire on the agenda management process throughout the entire organization? Or what about the city manager? And would their job be to explain the requirements for viewing and approving items, since they are an agenda item reviewer, and so they could tell you what they need from a system and the requirements that they would like? Looks like we have some answers coming in. Melissa, you ready for round 3?
All right. Let's see here. Well, I, yet again, am going to pick a few here. I think with finance, you're definitely going to want to get them involved, because I have a sneak peek at our next step, and I know you're going to want their input on when it comes to cost projection when you build your ROI. With IT, if you're building a case for a technology initiative, you always want your IT department involved, because at some point they're going to have to be involved. And getting them involved up front and excited is much better than bringing them in on the back end.
True.
Take it from experience. And your city manager, as you said and pointed out quite wisely, you're going to want to talk to all the beneficiaries, all the people that will benefit from your new process. And so you want to talk to the city manager, the city attorney, finance, all the departments that are submitting items, and understand their process. HR, I would imagine, would not be training new hires on agenda management procedures, because that would be your responsibility, since it's a departmental process rather than a municipal process. So I'm going to say A, B, and D.
Melissa, you're 3 for 3. Excellent. It's almost like you knew the questions that were coming, and perhaps even the answers.
No, that's not the case at all.
So in this case, we definitely want finance's support in planning the proposed solution. Finance is best equipped to help with financial projections and ROI analysis, just as you said. So IT is also extremely important, because they'll be doing the nuts and bolts portion of the implementation. They'll know the technical requirements the system will need to work with their existing technology portfolio, and they'll be prepared to estimate how long it will take to install the solution. The city manager can also be really helpful for describing the requirements of an agenda item reviewer. But HR probably doesn't need to be involved here. Since it's just a select group of people that will be primarily interacting with the system, it's probably best that the team working on the system train any new employees. This isn't a product like a timesheet system or an HR portal that will apply to every single new hire in the city. So HR probably doesn't need to get too involved. But now that we've figured out how the solution can work, it's important to highlight the benefits that it'll bring. Melissa's an expert at finding areas of value for your proposed solution, and she has some tips that she will share now.
Well, I think expert. I'm very proud of that, considering I majored in women's studies and not math. So this is one of these areas where I think people are a little scared, especially if they, like me, are not math experts. But if you aren't looking for areas where your project will demonstrate value, you aren't tracking them, which will make it hard in the future to point to the value your project has actually brought your organization. Now, what you're going to want to do is look at two primary areas, cost and benefits. And when it comes to cost, you're going to look at two main types of costs, project costs and operating costs. Now, project cost breaks down to two different types. You have project expenditures, which are all those things that occur at the beginning of the project. Development, testing, training, deployment. And they're usually pretty straightforward to estimate. You consider what work has to be done, how long it will take, and then put together your estimate for how much it will cost. Now, with capital expenditures, you're going to understand why I suggested finance in our last poll question, because capital expenditures are a little more complex. A project cost becomes a capital expenditure when you spend the money to acquire or develop an asset. The financial rules can be complex and often change, so you're going to want expert guidance from someone in finance about how you should represent these in your analysis. You may have heard these referred to as CapEx. So again, this is why it's important to talk to someone in finance, make friends with them, explain your project, get them on board, and have them help you out with this. Now, when it comes to operating costs, you're estimating how much money it will take to maintain whatever you're proposing. These are the things that involve overhead, personnel, office space, maintenance, licensing, any other ongoing expenses. Now, when you're looking at these types of operating costs, look at what you'll reduce as well as what you'll add. Perhaps your project will reduce your hardware maintenance expenses. Maybe you'll reduce office supply expenses because you'll be ordering fewer reams of paper. Maybe you will reduce seasonal hiring expenses because you won't have to hire temp workers during tax season. So be careful when you're looking at costs that you don't only consider the things that you're going to add. Now, when it comes to benefits, they consist of revenue, which is the money you generate through sales, and productivity savings, the cost you'll avoid through greater efficiency. Now, even though many of your municipalities, you generate revenues, I'm sure you know that, and they come from all sorts of things, tax receipts processed, more permits issued, any of those numbers of ways that you can get that money coming in. Now, if your project will affect revenue generation, work with those beneficiaries to estimate revenue. They can help you set realistic targets, both what you can expect, when you can expect it, and how automating those processes can help it come in more quickly. Now, with productivity savings, they relate to either product costs or overhead costs. Now, product costs are changing materials, automating assembly, maybe not too much related to knowledge work. But overhead productivity savings come from cutting those current ongoing expenses that stem from how you run the business. So maybe if you're not proposing an agenda management system, maybe you're proposing automating your AP approval process, and it would enable your company to hire fewer clerks without compromising payment. Such savings are usually flat. In other words, they're the same every year. Now, one word of caution around personnel overhead costs. Be careful when you're proposing cutting personnel costs unless you're going to avoid not hiring seasonal workers, not hiring temp workers. Stakeholders will probably ask what you're going to do with salaries. And unless you're actually not going to be paying those salaries, you're still paying salaries. Now, you can argue that, instead of filing paper, you'll be, these staff will be providing citizen service and it will provide better value to the citizens, and that's true. But you're not really saving money. You're just moving expenses from one place to another. Now, that being said, instead of pointing out that, look at other operating expenses you might be able to cut. Maybe your initiative will reduce overtime or reduce errors by giving staff more time to focus on their work, such as not having to reprint agenda packets, because something got missed, or perhaps you'll spend less on maintenance contracts. So again, start making lists, look at those things of costs and benefits, and you'll find those areas of value. Now, Katie, let's talk about Springfield and where they might be generating value with their agenda management initiative.
Thanks, Melissa. So it's our final poll for today's webinar. If you were presenting to the City Council, what benefits would you emphasize most when explaining the impact of the agenda management automated solution? Would you talk about revenue generation from agenda packets? Would you talk about revenue protection as it relates to agenda packets? Would you talk about avoiding overhead costs, storage space being an example? Or would you talk about a reduction of staff overtime expenses? Okay, Melissa.
You think I can go 4 for 4 here?
I have faith in you. I have a good feeling.
You have a good feeling. All right. Well, I'm going to say unless the City of Springfield is, unlike any municipality I'm familiar with, they're probably not bringing in a significant amount of revenue from agenda packets. So A and B are out. If I were presenting this case to the City Council, I would likely focus on C. Avoiding building a new building is going to be a very impressive number. In addition, you could talk about repurposing the existing space that's used to store file cabinets, perhaps something that would benefit the community, like space for an after-school program, or you'd have to look at some initiatives that the city was, driving towards to align that with, along those lines. Obviously, D, the reducing the staff overtime expenses would also be a benefit, but I think in terms of what would really get the City Council's eye and really demonstrate value, I would go with C.
Well, Melissa, you are 100% A+. Congratulations. You deserve a gold star.
It's a good thing I didn't miss any. They might take away, they might not let me teach this again.
Very true. So since agenda management really isn't bringing in any sort of funding from the public, answers A and B don't necessarily apply here. There's really no revenue to generate or protect from this process. But there is significant value to be gained by reducing overhead costs, storage space being an extremely expensive one, as Melissa mentioned, and then also reducing staff overtime expenses. In this case, the city clerk should really focus on cost savings when describing the value that the project will bring to Springfield. And once you've identified the value you bring, it's time to make your presentation, yay! And ideally, everything will go swimmingly, and you'll get the thumbs up, no problem, green light. However, oftentimes decision makers have questions or concerns that come up during your proposal. Melissa has some good tips for handling objections.
Yes, unfortunately, as much as we wish that every time we propose something, everyone said yes immediately, we live in the real world where even the most sensible, well-prepared business case will receive some level of pushback. So when it comes to actually receiving resistance to your ideas, there are some common types that objections will fall into. And if you're looking at pushing an initiative to another department, you may recognize some of these objections from your coworkers as well. The "this is too good to be true" objection is really common if you work in an organization where people frequently overpromise and underdeliver. It's an easy one to fall back on. You know, I don't believe this. There's no way this could possibly be true. So if you feel like you're likely to encounter this objection, take extra care in backing up your numbers, your estimates. Be sure you have subject matter experts on board who can speak to any figures you've listed. Have those references that you've talked to. You know, I talked to this city, I looked this up on Solution Exchange, I called these references, and they had similar experiences to show, no, this isn't out of the norm. It's pretty common. Now, the "but you haven't thought of" objections you'll generally get when stakeholders feel there are gaps in your analysis. And it's really important to be honest and direct in your responses. As much as you likely feel it personally because you put a lot of time and effort into preparing your case and building a strong initiative, Don't take it personally. Be calm and focused in your responses. And if you haven't considered whatever issue they're bringing up, say so. And you can offer to look into it and get back to them. And then the important thing is then do it. Get back to them. Now, if you don't believe the issue the stakeholder is raising is critical, you can say so. You can also have your champion reach out to that stakeholder on your behalf and discuss it. Maybe you don't think it's, you know, considering your agenda management system, you know, having it prepared in event of alien invasion is a critical part of your disaster recovery plan, but you don't feel comfortable bringing that up. Maybe have your champion have that discussion. And let them bring that up with the stakeholder and leave you out of it. So this is why it's important, again, build that team, have those people that maybe can have the conversations that you can't. And then the "we'll never get this done" objection. Generally, you'll get this when stakeholders think you're being overly optimistic about when things will be completed. Now, if you've talked to your IT team and you have their support, you can reply, "I've shared these timelines with IT, and they agree that installation and deployment should take no longer than 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, however long it should take." The other thing that's important is to remember ways to be persuasive. You're going to want to be persuasive, and you don't want to be bullheaded. You want to compromise. You want to go back and work with people, make them feel like they've been heard. Even if you only change one small thing, you want them to feel like they've had a part in building your case so they feel like they can give it their full support. So again, this is important when working with your coworkers too. You want them to, even though you feel like you may have built the best business case ever and you have the best idea ever, it works a lot better when people are with you rather than following. Yeah. And when it comes to resources, such as persuasion, Katie and I have a couple things that we'd like to recommend to you. First is an ebook that we'll be sending out to everyone with the recording on how to build a winning business case. A series of short articles on everything from steps to identifying your business needs, to what a business case is, how to give a presentation and combat those nerves, how to handle objections, way more detail than we could go into today. And the second thing is the ECM Buyer's Kit. For those of you who are engaged in building business cases, this includes some resources that you will probably find very helpful. The first is a PowerPoint that you can use as a basis for any presentations you'll be giving, and also an ROI guide, which always is helpful, and also a system checklist for ECM that you can use to go through and identify your own areas of value. And now, Katie and I would be happy to take any questions that you might have. Just go ahead and enter them in the Q&A box.
Great, and it looks like we've had a couple come through privately and in the chat box as well, so I'm going to go ahead and get started with those while the rest of you type out questions. The first question is, when it comes to giving the actual business case presentation, do you have any tips on how to reduce stage fright? Yes, we do have some tips. I think my biggest tip is that you have to be confident. Go in knowing that you've put in all of this work for this business case, and really you're the expert in the room. You know this material better than anyone else, so be confident and know that you do know this. You know, stand behind yourself.
I think probably my biggest tip is practice. There's probably no thing as too much practicing. And when you practice on your family or friends, someone who doesn't work with you, because if they understand what you're proposing, then your stakeholders will too, especially if they don't know too much about the technology you're talking about. It's always good to talk to someone who doesn't understand agenda management or ECM or whatever you're talking about. The other thing are some good presentation tips in general. Wear clothes you feel comfortable in.
Yeah.
Breathe and turn your phone off.
Yeah.
It's always hard. You know, you never want to be giving a presentation and feel your phone buzzing or worse, ringing.
Yeah. Ladies, don't wear heels.
Yes. Comfortable shoes.
Yeah, absolutely. The second question we got here is, how do you neutralize difficult stakeholders that want to derail the project? Well, that's definitely a tough one. My advice would really be to dig in throughout your research, especially in the areas of value, because it's really hard to argue with numbers and facts. You know, they may have something against your project for whatever reason, as Melissa mentioned earlier. You know, maybe they have their own project that they're pushing. But if you can really do a good job of explaining the value that your project brings, then there's really no arguing with that.
I think my advice would be to talk to them beforehand. When you actually present your case to whatever committee is approving it, you don't want any surprises. You should know what everyone's going to say before they walk into the room. And it, again, goes back to my advice on persuasion of making them feel like they're part of it. If, you know, try and talk to them and understand what they want to see, and if you can include them as, you know, or their ideas as a part of your proposal. And if they feel like they're being heard, they're probably more likely to give you their support. And then also realize when enough is enough. And if, you know, do a value judgment, talk to your champion, see if this person has enough influence to throw off your case. And if they don't, you know, it may be just, and you can't persuade them, it may be just best to spend your effort elsewhere.
That's true. That's true. Focus on what matters most. And the third question we have here is, what is an ROI analysis? ROI stands for return on investment, and it's basically a framework for describing the value, quantifying the value that your project will bring. An ROI analysis looks at the cost of the solution that you're planning on implementing, as well as the benefits it'll bring in terms of revenue or other productivity savings that Melissa mentioned. And these can be a little bit daunting for those of us that aren't math experts, but like Melissa mentioned, we actually have an ROI guide in the ECM Buyer's Kit that you're welcome to use as a resource. This doesn't necessarily just have to apply to ECM. If you have some other technology initiative that you're looking to start, you can use this as a framework for that as well. It has some good ideas for areas of savings and revenue generation and things of that nature.
Yeah, and there are different types of ROI analysis. Depending on the type of project you're looking at, you'll want to pick the right type of ROI analysis. The other thing is check what type of ROI analysis your organization uses. Again, this is why you want to be friends with someone in finance. They can help you with all of these things.
Absolutely. All right, it looks like the questions have slowed down here for a bit. Melissa and I will hang out for just a few minutes. If there are any lingering questions or thoughts, we'd be happy to answer. Otherwise, we really welcome you to reach out to us anytime. We have our phone numbers and our email addresses listed here, as well as our Twitter account. We love to hear from you, and we thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you learned something. We can't wait to hear about your successful business cases soon. Have a great one.
Thanks, everyone.